Hello, this is lesson 4 of my USA Biology Olympiad course. Um, this lesson is about carbon, and so just as an introduction, carbon is one of the most important elements to all biology and really just life in general. And it's also kind of just important like as a whole, like just like everything around you, because like I guarantee you that most of the stuff that you're surrounded with, just like I don't know, your table, your computer is probably all made consisting of carbon. So it is a really important element, and so it makes sense why there's an entire lesson on it. So the first concept is really, oh, I forgot to introduce the lesson, but the lesson overall is like it's pretty compact compared to the other lessons, but there is like a lot of material that you to memorize, and some of the material like yeah, you're gonna need to memorize it. And so the first concept, concept 4.1, the first of three concepts, is basically just the organic chemistry is the study of compounds containing carbon. It's basically um, this like the study of just organic materials and stuff like that, and it's called organic because of compound within it. And then the major elements of life are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. And so these are the major elements of life because they're all essential to life as a whole, and they're really crucial. And then the way they were determined is because, like, the way they were determined to be the major elements of life is from an experiment called the Miller-Urey experiment. And it was made by Stanley Miller from the University of Chicago and Harold Urey, both were at the University of Chicago. And so they did this experiment. You don't even really know the specifics of the experiment. I don't really understand it either. It's this diagram over here. But basically, what you need to determine is that their end conclusion was that life emerged from abiotic materials, like these elements. It emerged from them. Like, it basically came out of nothing. And then it just needs, like, specific, like, situation, no, a specific environment to form life. And so basically, life can come from anything. That's what they say. And so that's how like these major elements of life and organic chemistry as a whole came from this experiment. So it's pretty important. You don't even know like how it actually works, but essentially they used water and then chemicals here inside here, and they had electricity and heat and stuff like that, and then that's how they were able to just determine that. So yeah. Okay, so 4.2, concept 4.2 is the really big one. It's the one that has a lot of information. 4.3 as well. But basically, um, the element of carbon is really significant because of its biochemistry as a whole. So as we know, carbon has 6 electrons because, periodic table. It has 6 electrons, and because of that, that means it has 4 empty electron locations within its valence shell. And so that means it can form 4 bonds, which is a lot of bonds, and it has the highest valence of any biomolecule or any of the major biomolecules. So it has a higher valence than hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, because then hydrogen can only take one, oxygen can only take two, and then nitrogen can only take three, while carbon takes four. And so basically, as a reminder, valence is um, the number of electrons required to fill the valence shell. Yeah, that's the number. That's the valence. So it has one of the highest valences, and because of that, it makes carbon really flexible when it comes to forming bonds. It can basically form any type of bond, like double bonds and um, uh, single bonds, stuff like that. And then that's why it's so ubiquitous in biology. And so carbon dioxide is one significant example. It's CO2. So since think to our chemistry senses, um, that means that it has a carbon and it has 2 double bonds, one with each oxygen. And then, so that's carbon dioxide. And then urea is also a good example. So urea is what is inside urine. And basically, I don't remember the whole structure, but all you know is that it has a variety of, like, carbon does both a double bond and a single bond. Basically, what these examples are doing is they're just showing that carbon has kind of a really flexible and, like, I don't know, I forgot the term, but like it can just do a lot of things. And I threw this vocab term in here because you're gonna need to know it eventually. But an asymmetric carbon is one that is bonded to 4 unique atoms or groups. So for example, like if a carbon is bonded to a hydrogen and then it's bonded to another hydrogen and then it's bonded to like an oxygen and then it's bonded to like an ammonia group, that would be an asymmetric carbon because each of its four bonds are all different atoms or groups. But if it was double bonded to an oxygen and then bonded to a hydrogen and then bonded to a nitrogen, um, that would not be an asymmetric carbon because two of its bonds are with the oxygen because of the double bond. So that's what an asymmetric carbon is. And then I included this here. So this is a really common type of like uh chemical structure visualization, molecular structure visualization, and then basically like each of these like crossroads, you could say, or like each of the places where there's nothing there, that's where carbon is. And as you can see, carbon forms a lot of like hexagonal shapes, but essentially carbon is just so ubiquitous that they don't really depict it. Like here, carbon's forming a double bond here. These are all carbons all over here, but they just don't show it. But typically, later on in the quiz for this lesson, I'm gonna ask you to Google search like different structures. This is not what I want you to Google search. I want you to Google search this type of structure because you can actually see the carbon and then the bonds it's forming. But this is also fine technically because, um, like as long as you know that there are carbons there, it should be fine. But generally, this is like more open to beginners. So, oh, same for these. I want you to look at these types of things, like these. So basically, these are like different types of like shapes of organic molecules. So just know that organic molecules, when I say organic molecule, I'm talking about molecules with carbon in it. And so organic molecules, they can have three main types of shapes. So this is methane. And methane is CH4. It basically has one carbon and four hydrogens, and because of that, it forms um, a tetrahedral shape. As you can see, it's a triangular pyramid. So it forms a shape like this. And then just know that like the bond angles in it are 109.5 degrees. That's basically typical of any tetrahedral shape. And then you'll learn this in like basic chemistry, but like with each like molecular structure, there's like a select like bond length that typically forms. And so I was just doing that in there as an example. And so for this notation, the darker grays are carbons, and then the lighter grays are hydrogens. So yeah. And then this one, the second one here in the middle is ethane. So ethane is just kind of like it's C2H6, and so it has two tetrahedral shapes, where basically there's a tetrahedral here. Just look at my mouse when I'm doing this, like a tetrahedral here, and then a tetrahedral here, and then they kind of overlap because basically, just like this, where like the three bottom points form a triangle, the three hydrogens form a triangle, and then the top point is the bond, the shared bond, and then same for this one. And then lastly, you have ethene, and so ethene is just C2H4. So just if we visualize it, it's just a carbon, a double bond with another carbon, each of them have two hydrogens. And basically this structure is flat. It's basically two-dimensional. As you can see, the image depicts that, where it's all in the same plane, because since there's not really like three hydrogens or like three bonds that need a form that need it to become kind of three-dimensional, it just becomes like it's just flat. It doesn't need to be three-dimensional. And then mainly what you need to get here is that there can be three main structures of organic molecules, either tetrahedral, double tetrahedral, or multiple tetrahedral, and then flat, planar. So those are the main things you need to know. So yeah. Okay. Next we have hydrocarbons. So basically, hydrocarbons are molecules that are consisting of only carbon and hydrogen. I wrote this wrong. It's not carbons, it's molecules. Hydrocarbons are molecules consisting of only carbon and hydrogen. And so below here, this is a really good example. These are all hydrocarbons. As you can see, it's only carbon and oxygen. But also, I put these here as an example of the four ways that carbon skeletons can vary. So a carbon skeleton is basically like the kind of like a backbone of like a molecular structure. It's just a lot of chained carbons, and then they have bonds to the sides of them. And so that's what all these highlights are. These are the highlighted portions are all carbon skeletons. And so These are all really like famous examples or like well-known examples of carbon skeletons and hydrocarbons. These are in the textbook, and also you can find them just anywhere. Like I just googled this. And then so these two show how the carbon skeletons can vary in length. As you can see, one of them has only two carbons and another one has three carbons. um, these here show that carbon skeletons can vary in the position of the double bonds. As you can see, there's a double bond here, and for this one, there's a double bond here. And so, and then this one shows that the hydrocarbons or carbon skeletons can vary in their like structure. Like, there's like a T, upside down T, and then there's a straight line here. But it also shows how it can vary in the branching. So, like, it can be in a straight line here, or it can be branched out where the carbons are to the side of each other. And then lastly, hydrocarbons can also form rings, or not hydrocarbons. Sorry, I keep on saying hydrocarbons because that's like what these all are, but mainly I'm talking about like just carbon skeletons in general. They don't need to be hydrocarbons to have like these varied carbon skeletons. So they can be in like ring form like this or like this. Like either one's fine. But that's what I was talking about earlier, where it formed these rings, these hexagons. That's what the rings are. Carbon really likes to form that kind of structure because it's low energy. Just like throwing a fun fact in. Like later on in like really advanced chemistry, you'll know that like most of like biology is just based on like the energy, like and like consider like having the lowest energy and stuff like that, and then being like the most energy efficient because of entropy and stuff like that. So yeah, but basically here, carbon skeletons, just like when carbons are chained in a long chain and they have chains to the side of them, they vary a lot. So yeah. Okay, so basically, another thing about carbon is that they can have isomers, and another thing about organic molecules is that they can have isomers. So isomers are just variations of organic molecules. So there are three types of isomers. So the first one are structural isomers, and these are isomers that where they're the same formula, but they differ in their structural arrangements. So this top image is an example of that. So as you can see, they're both like three carbon, um, 10 oxygen, sorry, three carbon, eight hydrogen, and one oxygen. So they're all C3H8O, but as you can see, like the structure is different. Like the hydroxide is here instead of um here. Like the hydroxide got moved up here. They switched. So on paper, these two would be the same like chemical formula, but like their actual structure is different. And as we know, structure defines function. So obviously these two likely have very different functions in the body. And so cis trans isomers are basically like the overall structure and bonding is the same, but the arrangement of the atoms vary. So like the atoms are switched around with each other. And so this is an image of that. It's a really good example. So as you can see, the structure is the same, except in the cis version, the chlorines are all on the top and then the hydrogens are all on the bottom. And then with the trans version, these two are swapped. They swapped the positions of all of the elements of the atoms. And so, yeah, that's a cis trans isomer. And then, so typically the cis version is where like it's like symmetrical, and then the trans version is where it's asymmetrical. And then last you have I'm sorry, I can't pronounce this. Enantiomers, and basically they're the same structure but they're mirrored. So their spatial arrangements differ around an asymmetric carbon. Like we defined earlier, an asymmetric carbon is where the carbon all four bonds are to the unique elements or groups. And so the spatial arrangements differ, and typically they're mirror images of each other, so they're left and right forms. And so sorry, not syntax, the verbiage you use for it is levo for left and dextro for right, or L for left and then D for right. So like you can have like an L isomer, that's like the left version of it, the left-handed version of it, and then D isomer is the right-handed version of it. So as you can see here, this bottom image is a good example for it. It's literally mirror images of each other, and then enantiomers are pretty important because um, like one good example is like where um like a drug, like the one version of it is an ineffective version while the other version of it is an effective version, because as we know, like structure determines function, and so if it's a mirror version of each other, it doesn't fit right, like in where it typically would bond. Like say like this element bonds with something else, it typically wouldn't, like the left version of something wouldn't bond where the right version goes, and so it can cause issues. But yeah, so these are all things you should be memorizing, like the different types of the differences. I mean, these are just examples, but mainly the different types of isomers. You should memorize these. But yeah, and then sorry, I was drinking water. But yeah, enantiomers are really important in pharmaceuticals because typically in drugs, like I was saying, they have a lot of enantiomers of each other, and so yeah. Okay. Now, lastly, we have chemical groups. So chemical groups are basically like they're just like in a group of chemicals. And then in organic chemistry, what we like to talk about is functional groups. And these are chemical groups that of a large organic molecule that directly interact with chemical reactions. So we can think of chemical groups as like electrons in an atom, where the electrons are what interact with the other atoms. Like it determines like the reaction that happens and then the interaction. And so that's the same for chemical groups in molecules, where the chemical groups are what interact with outside molecules. And so there are seven essential groups, and these are hydroxyl, carbonyl, carboxyl, amino, sulfhydryl, phosphate, and methyl. And so these are all things you need to memorize, and this is what I was talking about, where this is the bulk of the lesson, right? Like it's kind of like a small portion at the very end, but this is what you should be memorizing because the quiz tests you a lot on this stuff. So yeah, and then one example of a functional group being really important is ATP and or adenosine triphosphate. And so if you know like a little bit of biology, you know that like cell biology, you know that ATP is basically the energy of cells, where it holds a lot of potential energy, and so that's just kind of like this is what's being like treated as like the energy when you have reactions like photosynthesis or glycolysis or just like any like energy transfer used to power the cells, like especially in the mitochondria or in the chloroplast for plants. And then adenosine triphosphate is called triphosphate because there are three phosphates in it. There are three phosphate groups, and these are the phosphate groups here. And then that's the adenosine. And so, yeah, basically, the next slide, I'm gonna have a graph of these seven essential groups, and then not a graph, sorry, like a chart. And then you're gonna need to memorize that. You're gonna need to memorize all of that. So I'll stay on there for a bit. And I have my own chart here that I'll be reading off of, but the other chart I have on the next slide is also pretty good. Like it's not gonna be as good as what I have, but yeah. So you're gonna need to memorize this. Okay, so first, um, yeah, this is okay. Technically, this is out of order of what I have, but I'll just go in the order of what you guys are seeing. So yeah, but hydroxyl. So the first one is hydroxyl. Um, hydroxyl is dash OH. Um, basically, it's just like a hydroxide, and then the group is like when hydroxide is bonded to anything, and so I like we know like as we know hydroxide, hydroxyl follows the same properties of hydroxide. So it's polar due to the electronegative oxygen, along with the hydrogen, and then it forms hydrogen bonds with water, and then it helps dissolve compounds like sugar. And so with each functional group, there's also a name for like the compound that's aligned with it. So like the group is named this, but the compound is actually named something else. And so the compound name for hydroxyl is alcohol. And so whenever you have something that has a hydroxyl group, typically the name ends with ol. So for example, ethanol. That's literally like what you drink, like the alcohol that we drink. That's ethanol. So yeah. And then ethanol has like the OH on the side, just like how this shows. And then the next one is methyl. So methyl is a carbon with three hydrogens. It's better to visualize it like this. I don't really like this visualization. And then I should probably also tell you guys about the notation. So um, R is just anything. Like R can be anything that the group is bonded to. And then also, like in the quiz later on, I'm gonna ask you guys to Google stuff. This is how I want things to be viewed, so you can see the carbons and all the elements, and then the types of bonds that they have. So yeah. But anyway, so carbonyl. Sorry, not carbonyl. Methyl. So methyl is C with 3 hydrogens, and then basically, um, it's really important for the expression of genes, especially when bonded to DNA or to proteins that bind to DNA. And so this includes like RNA or during transcription and stuff like that. So that's pretty important. And then so like it also affects the shape and function of hormones, a lot of hormones like testosterone or estrogen. And then the compound name for methyl is methylated compound. So that's pretty easy to memorize. By the way, I have like in the lesson there's additional resources. This is the first time you're gonna see an additional resource. It's a booklet I made that helps you memorize all of this because I know my speaking is not gonna allow you to memorize that easily. But yeah. So one example of this is, I mean, it's kind of pointless. Like it's 5 methyl cytosine. Like yeah, you probably don't know what that is, but yeah, no, it's just like an example. But yeah, that affects a lot of DNA stuff. Um, it's a component of DNA actually. So yeah. Anyway, next one is carbonyl. So carbonyl is just a carbon with a double bonded hydrogen, and then also note the amount of R's here. Like the R's like here the notation here determines like how many bonds it forms. Like here you can see that like it only forms these things only like hydroxyl and methyl only form one bond with like an external thing, but carbonyl can form 2 bonds because remember that carbon has 4 open slots and only 2 are taken up by the oxygen. So yeah, but anyway, carbonyl. So carbonyl is mainly important in sugars like sugars with ketone groups are called ketoses. If you like do diets, you know what ketosis is. It's like it's kind of just like your body's processing of carbohydrates and like forming glucose stuff like that. And then um so basically carbonyl has 2 different names. So ketone is the name for when carbonyl is in a carbon skeleton, um is inside a carbon skeleton. So like this, like these ones, like that. Sorry, there's no carbonyl here, but yeah, like it's when it's inside in the middle of that. And then the other name is aldehyde, and aldehyde is when carbonyl is at the end of the skeleton. So like so aldehyde would be like this carbon here if it had a double bond with an oxygen, and then ketone would be when carbon is just like in the middle, double bond to an oxygen when the carbonyl is in the middle. So yeah. So basically, sugars with ketones are called ketoses, and sugars with aldehydes are called aldoses. I don't think you need to know that part. You just need to know the compound names. So yeah, ketone is when it's at in the middle of the carbon skeleton. Aldehyde is when it's at the end of it. And so the reason that's important is because typically when carbonyl is at the end of it, then that means like it's that specific group, like that sugar group is like interacting. Specifically, the carbonyl is interacting with the outside stuff, and then if it's in the middle, it's not really exposed to it, if you know what I mean. So yeah. Okay, so next is carboxyl. So carboxyl acts as an acid. It's just basically, technically, carboxyl is really just a carbonyl group with a hydroxyl group together. That's something you should probably know. But yeah, it's just a carbon with double bonded to oxygen and then double bonded to a hydroxide. And then remember, because of the hydroxide there, it acts as an acid, and it donates hydrogen because of the covalent bond between oxygen and hydrogen, the polarity between that. And so the reason, because it acts like an acid, the compound name for carboxyl is carboxylic acid or organic acid. Those are 2 different names for it, but though you can use them interchangeably. Like it's not like with carbonyl where the 2 names mean something. It's just the same thing. And then here in these notes I have here that I put in the image for you guys, carboxyl releases H plus or donates hydrogen, and then yeah, that's why it's called acidic. Okay, so next is amino. So oh shoot, I forgot to provide examples. It's fine. These examples are like kind of niche, but yeah, I just know that like yeah. Anyway, for amino, so amino is just technically, I forgot what it's called. Hold on, let me search up what's N. So amino is just an NH2 with 1 bond. like it can bond to one thing, and then okay, yeah, it's just called amino. But yeah, NH2 is just an NH2, and then so as we know, like what's significant about amino is that it acts as a base. And the reason for that is because of the NH2. So we know some of the really important like molecules are like ammonia and ammonium. That's NH3 and NH4. And so because of that, we know that NH2 can take in hydrogens a lot. And so since NH2 takes in hydrogens a lot, that means it's a base. It accepts hydrogens to form NH3. That's what it says here. And so they're considered basic for that. And then the um, compound name is amine. So that's pretty easy to memorize, but it's important to not get them mixed up. Like if you're talking about like an amino group, then you say amino, but if you're talking about just the compound alone, then you say amine. And so um, one fun fact is that like aminos are what give amino acids their name because all amino acids, all 20 of them have amino in them. They all have the NH2. That's like it's part of their backbone, the protein backbone, and yeah, it's really important. So yeah, just one example is like glycine or alanine or anything like that. Like just any amino acid is a good example. Okay, so next is phosphate. So phosphate is significant because it's the only of these 7 groups that has phosphorus, and it's also bonded to like it's also like really interesting because the phosphate itself is not what bonds to things. As you can see, like in this diagram here, they're technically like all 5 of like phosphates, kind of like open slots for hydrogen have all been for bonding have all been taken up by the oxygens. It has 4 oxygens, and so um, in fact, it actually has like it's actually like taking in like more electrons than it can. That's why it has a negative charge, and so it contributes a negative charge to like whatever organic molecule it's bonded to, and then when attached to like an organic molecule, it confers on a molecule um, the ability to react with water. So it allows something to react with water and then it releases energy, which is why adenosine triphosphate is the energy molecule because it has so many phosphates that it releases a lot of energy. So it's also considered acidic. So yeah, and then um, lastly we have sulfhydryl. So similar to phosphate, sulfhydryl is the only of these groups that have sulfur. And so sulfur is really important. Sulfhydryl is really important because it forms disulfides. So disulfides are some of the most important and like common things you can find in proteins. And so when you have two sulfhydryl groups, as in a disulfide, it stabilizes protein structure because they react with each other. Oh shoot, I skipped over some stuff. Sorry. Um, the phosphate compound name is organic phosphate, and then the sulfhydryl group name is thiol, THIOL. So um, yeah, that's kind of most of the information you need to know about them. You can see here that it talks about like the polarity of each of them, and then also it yeah, these are just like why they're so important. Most of it is probably because of protein and stuff like that. But yeah. So memorize all of these. I have a booklet which helps you memorize them and their compound names, and also just anything significant about them, like how phosphate is the only one of phosphate. That sounded so dumb when I said it. But yeah, just try to memorize all of them. It's pretty important that you memorize them all. And then after this in the lesson, there are notes, stuff like that, the usual. Yeah. So have fun learning. Bye.